Good morning, good afternoon, hey everyone. Welcome to Our Small Footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. A little out of sync at the moment. Darryl and Surreal are away for Comic-Con, so I'm home with the 5 smaller kids on my own and trying to get everything done, along with just, all the general stuff that always needs doing. We've got a rooster talking to me behind me, of course, because I've just started talking. So video today is the second part of my food prep and planning and things like that for September after the 6-week grocery haul in September. So I've done part 1, which is the first couple of days. This is the next couple of days. Still working through all the stuff that I bought and sharing it with you as I go along. So a little bit of my spiel that I try and get on each of the videos. We shop every 6 weeks. We travel 3.5-4 hours away to do so because that is the most cost-effective place to do it. I have accommodation there to stay at my mum's, and there's Costco as well as fruit and veg stores and butchers and Coles, Woolworths, Aldi and all that sort of thing. And by doing it every 6 weeks, it means it's less time spent doing it in the long run. Like, it feels like a long time when I do it, but if I'm only doing it every 6 weeks, it works out well. And we learn to use what we have more efficiently because it's all we've got. And we spend less money because we use what we've got. We don't go buying other bits and pieces. So when I first started sharing that we were doing the 6 weekly, everyone was interested in what we used and how we used it and things like that, and these videos came about. And I do them every couple of days for a couple of days worth of food prep, planning, preserving, all that sort of stuff. So part 2 for September on the way. So we're starting off on Monday morning here, and we actually had some goslings hatch. So we've been a bit tied up because we only just discovered that they had hatched. So I also had a bunch of typing to catch up on because I had been away for the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I do as much typing as possible on the Wednesday that's outstanding, but I don't do much on the Thursday and the Friday. And then I tend not to do it on the Saturday and the Sunday either because I'm just come home and I'm doing all the food stuff, and it's more of a weekday type thing. So it means that on Monday though I have to catch up on what has been missed for prior to the weekend. So I spend a lot of the Monday doing typing if there is any, and if there isn't any to do, then that's just wonderful as well. But I do use it as a bit of a catch-up day. So Monday I quite often don't get a lot done. So the kids helped themselves for breakfast. They did their normal cereal and stuff like that. And then we had leftovers for lunch. There was leftover ramen from the day before. There was still bread from the hamper. And there's ham, there was chicken, all sorts of things. So it was a bit of a serve yourself lunch as well. So I didn't film any of that kind of stuff. And it was late afternoon by the time I was in the kitchen and started working on things. So what I did once I got into the kitchen, I started by finishing those chickens that needed shredding. So I had 5 chickens left that needed to be shredded and pieced. So that's what I started off with. Pulled all the meat off them like I'd done the other 3 and put it aside to be shredded. A few people have commented that they use their paddle and the KitchenAid to shred chicken. Now I've only done that warm as well, a bit like the Thermomix, so I don't know that it would work as well. A bit like the Thermomix needed a few tweaks to work with the cold chicken meat, but if anyone's done it with cold meat, then let me know if that was more successful, because it did end up quite small and bitty using the Thermomix with the cold chicken rather than shredded into those shreds. But I can just cut it with a knife if I really want it in a specific shape. So it's handy to have the Thermomix or the KitchenAid or a food processor or something just to make it a little bit easier anyway. So I stripped the rest of the chooks, and then you put the meat aside, put the carcasses in the freezer like before. Then, because I've got that chicken already sorted, I'm going to use that for dinner. So the first thing I did was make a big Thermomix bowl of a white cheesy sauce to start with. Now I say this all the time when I talk about the Thermomix, and that is that one of my favorite things about it is things like this, where you can make something like a white sauce or a custard or something like that, and you throw everything into the bowl and you turn it on and let it go. So for me, using a pot and a whisk, it's really hard on my hands and my wrists and things like that. But also we have a gas stove, which means that the ambient heat that comes up from underneath the pan is quite high as well. And I'm normally trying to do lots of things, and we only have 2 burners. So having that Thermomix for that is really handy. So I just made a standard sort of a white sort of cheesy sauce. I put about 1 litre of coconut cream, about 1 litre of stock, about 120 grams of ghee, and the same of flour, salt, pepper, some smoked paprika, garlic powder, onion powder, mustard, and nutritional yeast, and then just turned it on. So it goes on speed 4 at about 90 degrees for about 6 or 7 minutes, and you can hear the sound of it change when it's turned into this, you know, a thicker white sauce. So I just let it go while I kept on doing everything else. And for me, that is one of the, as I said, one of the big bonuses of Thermomix is that hands-off sous chef type thing. That's what I use mine a lot for, is food prep and sous chefing. So I chopped up a large amount of the broccoli and the cauliflower, as that's the vegetables that we need to get through first. They're the things that are going to go bad first. So I cut it all up into pieces. We like to use the stems of the broccoli and everything as well, and cut it into, you know, thin strips. You do want to cut the stems fairly small because they can be a bit woody, but we like them. It's got a good flavour and it goes further. The animals would eat them if we gave it to the animals, of course, but the food is bought primarily for us, and extras go to the animals rather than the other way around. So all I did was 500 grams of pasta, because we've got lots of veggies, we don't need too much pasta. I cooked the pasta in a pot of boiling water, and then once the pasta was almost done, I threw all the broccoli and cauliflower into the pot with the pasta. This is just going to blanch it a little bit, which is just going to make the cooking time a little bit shorter in the oven. Because the chicken is already cooked, then it doesn't need too long in the oven. It's just going to be heating it through and emulsifying it and things like that. So by blanching those vegetables first, it gives us less cooking time needed once it hits the oven. So I made some breadcrumbs with the Thermomix. I just used stale bagels that I had put in the freezer when they hadn't been eaten. And then I drizzled a little bit of olive oil on them, which will help them to brown up when they're on the top. They're already seasoned because they had everything but the bagel seasoning on them. So I don't need to put any seasoning in with the bread crumbs. They're already seasoned, which is nice. Bit of onion, garlic, sesame seeds and poppy seeds, that kind of thing. So after that, I filled the trays with the broccoli and the cauliflower and the pasta mix. So I then topped it with a generous amount of the shredded chicken and poured the white sauce over the top. So all we're doing is a pasta, veggie, chicken, white sauce sort of a bake. And it was just a really simple thing that I could do with the chicken that I had just worked on, and using lots of veggies all in one go. So I poured the sauce over it, mixed it through a little bit, and then sprinkled the breadcrumbs over the top and stuck it in the oven. Super simple and fairly mild tasting, so everyone enjoys it. Most of my kids are pretty good with vegetables, to be honest. I serve them enough that they just realise that they need to eat them with each meal, and everyone loves a pasta bake, so you know. After that, so that was the first day of this one. So that was dinner. So that was Monday. On Tuesday, the first thing I got started was with some of the capsicum. So I got some great ideas throughout the previous video. A lot of people suggested stuffed peppers. I don't know if I'll manage to do that because Darryl's being away over the weekend and whether they last and things like that. But we will definitely try that at some point, even if it's not this lot of capsicums, even if we get the next lot of capsicums. Because Darryl was keen to give that a go. But first thing I'm going to try and do with these ones is I'm going to try smoking them and then grinding them up as like a paprika style seasoning. We use smoked paprika a lot, but it's made from a specific style of capsicum, generally speaking, but pepper, capsicum, whatever you want to call them. And I have ordered some seeds for a paprika style pepper to try and grow, but I've never been particularly successful with it before. So what I thought is I'd give this a go and see how it went. So I cut them into strips, just like you would if you were eating it raw or in a salad or whatever, and I put it on some old pizza trays that I have to put in the smoker. I used red and yellow because that's what I had, the ones that looked in good condition. I took most of the seeds and membranes out and then spread it on the tray to give it a go. Now I'm really not sure how this is going to work or what the temperatures are going to be needed and all that sort of thing, but we have plenty of them, and if I don't get them used, they're going to go bad. So the point is trying to find things that work in a fairly quick manner so that I can give it a go. For lunch, I cooked up some quick flatbreads. We do this all the time. I have been trying to put a video together of all the different styles of the way I do my flatbreads because people ask all the time, because they're just such a quick thing that I don't always film doing them, because I make them, like I get up in the morning, I'm still in my pajamas, and I throw together a flatbread dough so that someone else can make lunch. But I will try and get that video out as well. And we just had that with some of the shredded chicken, the baby spinach and the mayo. It's a very standard summer lunch around here, especially if we've got tomatoes and stuff in the garden. Flatbreads and whatever we've got is something we eat regularly. After lunch, I kept going with more strawberries. Again, I'm just rinsing them and roughly chopping off the tops and slicing the flesh in half. All I want to do is get through all the strawberries that are left and get them sorted in some way so that before they go bad. The whole point is just to get it all done and preserved or processed in some way that they made sure they get used, because I hate spending money on stuff and then it not getting used. Yes, if it goes to the animals, it is still getting used in a sense, but that's not why it was bought. So I much prefer to get it used for us. So that's why I work on trying to get things done in order of how quickly they're gonna go bad, and strawberries are something that will go bad pretty quickly. Once all of them were done, I started pureeing some, and that was basically because I didn't have room in my bowls and stuff, so it meant that I could puree some in the Thermomix and get more room in my bowl. I also put all the tops into the steam canner. Again, more about getting the bowl emptied because the bowl of tops was full and I needed more room. So I poured them all into the steam canner, got water in the steam canner, got it ready to go. Once all of them were done, I put the steam canner on. There were plenty of tops to fill almost the whole of the top of the bowl, so I just did them on their own this time. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with it in the end, but let's get it juiced and then we can figure it out. It's sort of how I felt about it. Just needed to get these processed and done, and then I could figure out what I'm doing with it later. I pureed some of the strawberries in batches. I'm going to make a version of the strawberry lemonade concentrate that does the rounds all the time. I think it's a Ball Mason recipe for jars. Had it on their Instagram recently. A lot of people make it. I have made it once before, last year or the year before, and we really didn't like it, to be honest. It's 6 cups of strawberries, 4 cups of lemon juice, and 6 cups of sugar, and we just found it too much. It was a little too bitter, a little too strong, it really wasn't something we enjoyed. And what I ended up doing with it, actually, when I did can it, was I ended up pouring it into a pot and doubling it with water and adding a bit more sugar to make it more what was our style of drinking. So what I'm doing is I'm basing it sort of on that strawberry lemonade concentrate, but in a cordial way that we know will get used. So I doubled the recipe and I did 12 cups of the strawberry puree. I then added a cup and a half of passion fruit, which I had frozen. Cup and a half approximately of mango. It was frozen in like 1/4 cup size ice cubes, so about a cup and a half of that. I also added the same in lemon juice, about a cup and a half. Again, it was frozen in those ice cubes. I then added in the sugar, which I did about 50% of the liquid approximately, so around about 8 cups to the 12 cups of strawberries plus the, like, what was that, 4.5 cups of other ingredients, so that's 16.5 cups, so I did about 8 cups of sugar, so I did about 50%, which is where we sort of like our sweetness to sit for most of our cordials. I discussed that before. If it was heavier on the lemon, then it probably would have needed a bit more sugar just to cut that, but generally speaking, we do about 50% of the liquid in sugar. Standard rate is normally about a cup to a cup, and we find that far too much. So I also added some citric acid and some tartaric acid. I always do the strawberry lemonade recipe. Concentrate doesn't have it. It's got a lot of lemon juice. All these fruits can be canned on their own. It's not like they need it, but I like to add it. It's just something I do with all my cordials. The tartaric acid can help with stopping it to ferment if the lid's not sealed properly. And the citric acid keeps it nice and brightly coloured, as well as giving it a little bit of a tart flavour. I brought it up to a simmer and then let all the sugar dissolve. Now, I did add water to the pot here. So the strawberry lemonade concentrate has no water in it, but most of my cordials have a portion of water in it, which I think is one of the big differences that we appreciate between the two of them. So I basically just put enough water in there that the pot was at a point where I couldn't add any more. I didn't really measure it, to be honest. I just topped up the pot to the point where I couldn't put any more in there. This is what the strawberry tops look like after being steamed. There's no red colour left in them, and they've reduced to about 1/4 of what they started at. I got almost 2 litres of strawberry juice out of this, so that was pretty good. And it's bright red colour, and it smells lovely. I didn't taste it, but I couldn't think of anything worse than hot strawberry juice, though I have hot strawberry topping, so, you know, that's a bit strange that my brain went there. But about 2 litres of this strawberry juice to figure out what I want to do with. The next thing I did was work on some chilies. I decided to make a sweet chili and garlic sauce, so I did a whole bunch of research after asking you guys what I should make, and one of the things that was mentioned was a sweet chili sauce and the chili jams. I thought that it would work really well for things like spring rolls, dim sims, rice paper rolls, and that sort of thing, but I think Darryl will find it useful in a lot of things because he really likes cowboy candy, and looking at the ingredient base, very similar sort of a thing with a slightly different texture. So hopefully that we'll find good uses for, and if not, I'm sure I can find people who were willing to take it off my hands and use it instead. So I used a recipe that based on a Sally Wise recipe. She makes some really great recipes out there. A lot of them don't have strict instructions. They're a little bit like, this is what you can add and you can alter and things like that, like a lot of her cordials. So this is another one that was a bit similar to that. I wanted 900 grams worth of chilies, and now I don't know whether that was supposed to be 900 grams before you process them or 900 grams afterwards. I went for afterwards. So I took the tops off them, took most of the membrane and seeds out. I wasn't super careful about the seeds because I think the seeds will look nice floating in the sauce, but we didn't want too much heat from those seeds either. So I put them all into the Thermomix, and I pulsed it a few times until it was sort of a minced texture. I wasn't real sure how I wanted this to go. Like, the sweet chili sauce looks nice with the bits floating in it, but I didn't want the bits too big either, because if we're using it as a dipping sauce, I don't want the chunks of chili, and the kids wouldn't like that either. So I decided to just go for a minced texture, a bit like we do with the cowboy candy. And then that way, those little tiny pieces are just going to become part of whatever you're eating, and it's not going to be crunching on the chili. So I put the 900 grams in and I pulsed it and got it to a minced texture. I used a mix of vinegars. I like the idea of the sourness of rice wine vinegar being part of the dish, and a lot of when I was Googling recipes, a lot of the Thai style sweet chili sauces had rice wine vinegar and things like that. But it's not something that I buy in large quantities. So I used what I had, and I just happened to have a 1 litre bottle as well as a smaller bottle, and used what I had and put that in, and then use the rest in apple cider vinegar. So it's a personal preference really on the vinegars. You just want to use a vinegar. Now we come back to there is a discussion, especially in Australia, about vinegar and safe canning practices because our vinegars aren't 5%. For something like this, there's a huge ratio of vinegar to everything else. It's not that big a deal. But if you want to be pedantic about it or careful about it, which you should be when you're canning, especially if you're unsure, most of our vinegars are 4%. So what you need to do is add an extra 20% of vinegar to your recipe and reduce the water if there's water added to it by that amount as well. I didn't. The rice wine vinegar that I'm using was actually not Australian. I did use apple cider vinegar, which is Australian. It doesn't have a percentage on it, but the ratio of vinegar to chilies in this recipe, I was comfortable doing what I was doing. So it ends up being, I think it was 3.1 litres of vinegar. I'll have to try and find a link to the recipe and put it up for you. But I think it was 3.1 litres of vinegar to that 900 grams of chili. And the whole thing is that if you're using a vinegar ratio, then vinegar has the ability to acidify 3 times its weight. So that works out around about right as a little bit of generous amount there. 2.7 litres to 900 grams of chilies would be around about right to make sure it was acidified. But because we're adding the sugar to it too, that makes a difference as well. So anyway, personal preference here, but I used a mix of vinegars. I put it all in the pot and then realised that, as I do fairly often, that especially with new recipes, that there was no way I was going to fit the sugar in that pot as well. But I needed the pot that I was using for the cordial. So I got gifted someone sent me a Soga pot, one that I've been eyeing off for ages, and it's a 23 litre pot that is the same as the ones that I'm using here. And it's the perfect size for double and triple batches of things that I've already made before, but I've been making so many things that I haven't tried before that I don't want to make them in that large an amount. So the 14 litre pot is perfect, which means that I would try and use it multiple times in a day, sometimes though. So anyway, I needed that one that I'd done the cordial in, so I was going to have to wait to do that and get the cordial strained first. So with the passion fruit and the mango flesh in the cordial, I wanted to strain it a little bit. Nothing extensive because we want the strawberry flesh to stay predominantly in the cordial because it's a concentrate. But I wanted to get the passion fruit seeds and some of the stringy bits of mango out. So I just did it through a colander, just standard fine colander, no cloth or anything, into a bowl before pouring it into the jars. Again, I used the Muddy Posada jars because they're pretty, basically. And they just work really well for this kind of thing. A narrow pouring mouth, which means you're not over pouring it. And they're, I think, 780 mils, maybe? Something like that. So they're a good size as well. I washed a whole lot of jars because I wasn't sure how many I was going to get. So I just did the normal. I poured it, as I said, I strained it into a bowl, used that bowl to pour into the Muddy jars, and just filled as many as I got. Once they were full, I cleaned the rims with white vinegar as per usual and screwed the lug lids on well. Lug lids you need to screw on nice and firm. I'm using a mix of new and old lids here. I always assess the lids before I'm going to use them, so the kids aren't allowed to throw lids out. They get tossed into a box, and I sort them into sizes, and then when I go to can something, I go to the box with the size relevant to it, and I go through them and decide whether some are usable or not. I throw out the ones that aren't usable again and keep the ones that look okay and reuse them. So I got the lids on there and nice and tight. Now I use my pressure canner as a steam canner again because my steam canner is too short to do these passata jars in. So I warmed the water up because the cordial's warm. I put the rack in and put all the jars in, put the lid on and put it on medium-high heat. And then let it go. While that was warming up and doing what it needed to do, I cleaned the pot from the cordial so I could transfer the chilies to it. And then I added the sugar. As I said, I'll try and find the link to the recipe, but I think it was 4 kilos of sugar for this quantity. So I added the sugar, put it on the stove. I'm basically going to bring it to a boil to dissolve all the sugar and then turn it down to a simmer until it's the consistency I want. So this is going to cook down quite a lot. I think that's why I put it in the Dutch oven initially, because I'm sitting there thinking about the quantity that it's going to end up at the end, not the quantity that it starts at, because we're going to cook it down to a sticky sort of a syrup, because that's what sweet chili sauce is like. And most of the recipes that you find for sweet chili sauce that you're not canning have a cornflour slurry added to them to make them that texture, and I'm not doing that. All I'm going to do is I'm going to cook it down to the texture that I want and then can it at that point, sort of making it into a bit of a jam. Sort of. Not quite, but sort of. So I'm going to put that in there on the stove and I'm just going to let it go. Once the pressure valve pops up on the canner, I start the timer for 15 minutes processing time for the cordial. There are quite a few people who don't process cordials at all, especially if they're adding citric and tartaric acid and things like that. But I prefer to process anything that goes on my shelf. I'm not the only person who uses it, so I'm not quality checking necessarily every time a jar is opened, and I just prefer to know that anything that makes it to my shelf has been processed, and then I don't have to worry about. The kids aren't real great at rotating things either, and until I get the new kitchen structure built, which I'm trying, the shelving isn't very easily rotatable either. I try, every time I do the groceries, I rotate cans and things like that, but it doesn't always happen, so I much prefer everything to be processed before it's put on my shelves. I'd intermittently checked the capsicums throughout the day, but it just wasn't smoking evenly and some of it was burning. So I decided in the end to pull it out and get rid of the really burnt stuff, throw everything in a bag, and I'll move it to the dehydrator the next day, so long as we've got good solar. I think in future, if I tried in future, I'd probably leave it in maybe halves and hit it with really low, hit it on really low temperature with a whole bunch of smoke for a couple of hours, and then pull it out and cut it up and put it in the dehydrator in little diced pieces or something like that. I think that's how I would go next time. We have a little bit of trouble running the dehydrator power-wise, so I don't run it anywhere near as often as I would like. I am trying to set up a solar dehydrator. I bought some of the materials to do it, but it's just one of those projects that hasn't happened yet. But anyway, we're going to give this a go. So I've put it in the fridge for overnight, and then I will stick it in the dehydrator tomorrow and see how it goes. The sweet chili sauce as well, it took all afternoon to cook down, so in the end I put the lid on it. It's still getting down to 0 overnight here, so I put the lid on it and just left it on the stove overnight, and then tomorrow morning I will turn it back on and bring it back up to a simmer before I can it up into jars. And I do that with things quite often because it's still, at the moment, I can't do it in summer, but at the moment it's still getting to 0 overnight, and if I just don't make it by the end of the day, then that's what I do. In summer I can't do it, but at the same time it's daylight till 9 p.m, so I would quite often just stay out in the kitchen and get it done then anyway. It's just that it's cold and dark and in winter, so I tend to want to go inside. But anyway, so that was the next couple of days of September's food prep, planning and everything else. And now I'm going to go inside and try and get this all sorted for you to share today. So thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you on the next video.